databases never looked at location, any point or XYZ kind of a point was handled as like typical any spreadsheet. But today, or in the last 7-8 years, spatial databases have become an important priority. Once you are able to handle spatial, the difference between a spatial database and a normal data is that if you look at the location like X or the latitude, longitude, or the coordinate information is just like any other information, okay, as far as a typical database is concerned. But if you look at it from a locational point of view, like everybody wants to know if my house is next to whose house. You have some landmark, you have some neighborhood, some distance that has to be calculated. So interestingly, in these parameters, we want to find all kinds of relationships. They are not just ranked or sorted kind of stuff, which is typical of a database, but not that kind of a thing. We are looking at, is this fellow in front of the other one? Is this building somewhere else? How far is it? How close is it? Is it inside a city? Is the city located X kilometers from another major city? So all those relationships, which is referred to as topology, is something that came out of the locational needs. Okay, so now building topology into these in the area of computer science has led to a huge opening up of areas. Almost in every area of e-governance, GIS is actually becoming pervasive. Okay, at least in the last 2 years, even the governments have recognized that. So the first thing happens to be these kinds of locational development plans. There happens to be like all the water related programs. There's something called as Integrated Water Development Program, okay, IIIT, which is being funded again by central government along with state government funding and stuff. So even in those kinds of things, it's been very clear that you have to create a local database, local resource information base, and that resource information base is actually anyway location specific again. So you have to prepare that, and that has to be made available to panchayats. That has to be made available to the block development officer, and only then he can actually plan what is the impact of it and stuff. So for example, you are in a place where it is resource poor, but the amount of population is very high, okay, then the kind of approach that you want to do is very different from what you do in another place. So this has had an effect on planning. For example, early on, most of the planning was one policy for the whole country, and what is referred to as blanket policy making. You made a policy and then it's applied everywhere, okay, irrespective of their local variabilities. It has been increasingly found that even though there are good cases where they are succeeding, there are also cases where they won't succeed, right? And they are not succeeding not because the plan or the policy was right or wrong. It's because the conditions in which they are being implemented are very different. So how do you get to those conditions? That means you need local information, right? So like how cultures are very local specific, a lot of outcomes are also very location specific. So they are either physical factors, they are either social factors, or economic factors, and how do you integrate them? So you need some tools or techniques to do that. So GIS became one level of integration at that point and stuff. Like a flood model showing how many people will be affected. If it is shown, let's say 24 hours before the flood hits, then the decision maker has a better way of deciding it, right? Rather than just telling 20,000 people. But 20,000 where? Okay, and for how long? Will the 20,000 be the first affected? Will 20,000 be the affected after 10 hours? So I know my lead time for response. I know the kind of, let's say in this case, the impact levels that might be there for each one of them, the possibility of adaptation that they may have or they may be able to handle or not handle. So you can prioritize now your problems, right? So that is the primary requirement. A lot of new technologies, like it or not, starts with government sector supporting it to a large extent. Because that's where you can actually show it works, it handles and stuff, and they might take it a long-term perspective to it, okay? Whereas in the business terms, it has to be mid-term or short-term in nature. So for that, the technology has to mature, okay? So the technology maturing takes time for the business or industry to actually take it up. So for example, BI happens to be one area where they are trying to rush into it because they think that there will be some immediate outcomes using the same techniques. You don't have to really reinvent the wheel. But there are the other kind of challenges that are there typically in this space, which is I think both industry will face, as a user or a government agency also is facing, is that this is dependent on a lot of data. Okay, there are a lot of sectoral informations, which are also referred to as vertical domains, right? And interestingly, in the current government structure or the current system that we have multiple agencies owning different parts of it. So the integration across these is something that has never happened, okay? And they are just starting to happen in what is referred to now as spatial data infrastructure. It's a huge amount of investment that's kind of is expected in the country on that. The idea is to build these kinds of things so that each department knows or can actually leverage on some other thing, okay, and then handle that. Let's say if you look at it very sectorally specific, which might be very easy, one way of looking at it. If you look at that, for example, you look at agriculture, okay, the government is now wanting to invest in something called as weather-based indexes, okay. So there's an insurance scheme, an agricultural insurance, based on how the weather is kind of going to change in a particular place, okay. And so the weather responses in different places are different. Though two places as little as 100 kilometers away might respond very differently in a drought year. One might still survive, and one may have real problems of even getting the basic food. Okay, so there is an issue with that. So by providing this kind of information base, you really know why it is happening there. So where even in a bad year, where is the resources completely gone or very little available, whereas in some other place it might still be endowed with something, right? So you may have alternative solutions.